everybody has issues. Whether you're struggling from a family curse, whether you're suffering from addiction, a trauma, whether you're suffering from bad habits, lack of motivation, or you might have a health problem. You have a health problem inherited from your parents. You have an addiction inherited from your mother or your father. We all have these challenges, issues, addictions, problems with relationships. You always sabotage your relationships, or you always get into bad relationships. Like, we all have these things. And if you're going to deny it, then that is another issue. We all have them. I have them, you have them, everybody. The richest people in the world have issues. And not everybody makes them public. Not everybody talks about all of their issues. But at some point, you realize that people have to deal with the issues, and they come out, especially when you're older. That's why a lot of people, when they're 40, they come out with these issues. I was traumatized. I have this addiction, and I have this addiction. And there's a history of relationship. And it's important to recognize you have these issues. That's the first step, which is very hard. It's important to say, I have a drug addiction, right? Instead of saying, I just drink a lot of alcohol, to say I have an addiction to alcohol. Instead of saying I just do a lot of marijuana, I have an addiction to marijuana. I have an addiction to gambling. I have an addiction to bad relationships. I have an addiction to shopping. Whatever it is. First step, recognize whatever it is, whatever the issue is. If it's a health issue that you're struggling with, or whatever it is. It could be mental, emotional, it could be health related. And then think about where the issue comes from. Because in my research, in my work, that whatever you don't finish in this life, whatever you cannot overcome in this life, whatever issue you cannot deal with in this life, in your life, you will pass on to the next person who's connected to you, which are your children. So whatever you cannot deal with in this life, your children will inherit these sets of issues. Now, we've talked about all these health and addiction relationship, but also karma, right? Karma is another transferable issue. If you cannot resolve your karma in this life, let's say you did something and you can't deal with it. Let's say you committed a crime, right? You committed a crime, or you were involved in a crime, and you escape. Let's say the police don't catch you, you escape persecution, and you're involved in some other petty crimes. And you justify to yourself, well, I needed the money. Or she'll get over it. right? Well, she got over it. Those are karmic debts, right? Corruption. You defraud somebody, you cheat somebody. That is karma now that carries on into your next progeny, your children. It can also carry on into your next life. So whatever you do gets imprinted onto yourself, and then it's like you make a photocopy. So it's in you, and then you make a photocopy into a child, and the child has that imprint. Now, it can be at many different levels, right? If it's an addiction, let's say that's genetic. So that genetic disposition, the genetic weakness, gets imprinted. If it's at the spirit or soul, right? Your spirit soul is also transferable into your next life and into your child. Part of you is in the child. So that's imprinted into the child. Spirit soul is also karma, right? Karmic debt is imprinted on the soul. You may not see it. You may take a lot of painkillers so you don't have to deal with it. But it gets transferred. It gets transferred to your next life, and it gets transferred, depending on what it is, depending on how serious it is, and it also gets transferred to your child. So now your child has these issues if you did not resolve them. And so why is this important? Because if you have issues today, and they can be serious or can be general, you inherited them from your parents. And your parents inherited it from their parents, so your grandparents. So if you want to resolve, so the key is if you want to resolve the issues, then you have to understand where it came from. But in another way, if I'm struggling with some kind of addiction, maybe it's addiction to my temper, addiction to to some kind of chemical, let's say, and then I have children, and then my child has the same addiction. So now my child, who I love, suffers. They're suffering. They're in the hospital, right? They're in jail. They got addiction problems. And I know I had the same problems, but I never dealt with it. I just kind of, aged it out. I got old enough to retire. I'm not going to think about it. So what? I ruined a lot of people's lives. I'm old now. I don't care. But now the child suffers. So you see what happens now. The child suffers. You love the child. Now you got to help the child. Although the child is helping you with your issues. Like if you have alcoholism and your father had alcohol, was an alcoholic, now you are helping your father, right? Or your mother with this issue. By now you're taking this which they did not handle. And now the parent who loves the child has to care for the child, has to give them money, has to go to the hospital, has to, when they get divorced or put on the street, has to take them in. So now the child is helping the parent, and then the parent has to help the child. So in effect, if the parent is helping the child, now the parent is forced to deal with these issues because they love the child. They didn't love themselves enough when they had the problem, but they love their child. so that they will help the child. In helping the child gets better, they get better. But it was only transferred to the child because they did not adequately deal with it when they were suffering. So you have this transference of these issues. You also have transference of karma. So let's say I've done some bad things in my life, and everyone's done bad things in their life. I have children, and then bad things start to happen to my children. And I start to think, oh my God, it's terrible. My child is suffering. But if you go back, it's connected to the parent, right? Now, the hard part in all of this, understanding this, is that we lie to ourselves and we block out things that we don't like. So some of our problems, we can't see it. I don't remember, right? We blocked it out. So you might think, I don't know why my child is having all these problems. Because you blocked out everything you've done, you've forgotten about it. But if you think back, there are things in your past. Everyone has things in their past. Everyone makes mistakes. Anybody who says, and if you say I don't, then that's a flat out lie. And you can lie to me, but if you want to see recovery, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself. Like, you don't have to be honest with the world necessarily, but that might be part of that sometimes some people, they just make it public. But that's the only way to recovery, is understanding what your role is in it. So I've talked about you and a child, but if you are suffering, then you got to look to your parents. Why am I suffering? Why do I have this issue? Why did I develop drug addiction? And you look to your parents and you say, well, my parents were immigrants and they didn't do drugs. So why do I have this drug addiction? So there's something happened as a child, something your parents did that traumatized you enough to cause you to rebel or to dull your pain. Something happened, or some friend, or some relationship, or some spouse, right? First marriage. So why is that important? Now, if you have issues and you're trying to overcome it, people want to get better. At some point, you want to get better. You start going to therapy, you start doing meetings, you start dealing with your issue. Now, it doesn't matter. It could be addiction. It could be a health issue, right? I've always had these health problems. What's the cause? What's the genetic link? Like on a simplistic level, right? A simplistic level. So let's say you don't know what's going on. On a simplistic level, just break it down. Like, I have a disposition, I like to eat pasta. And you're like, I don't know, I like to eat pasta. And people say, why do you like to eat pasta? And, your parents they're Ukrainian. Okay? Let's just say they're Ukrainian. And they don't like pasta. They like potatoes. So you are, I love pasta. I got pasta, pizza, right? I love drinking espresso. So you think, well, it doesn't make sense, right? Well, something's going on. Now, you can ignore it, right? Because this is not threatening. This is not like an addiction. But I'm using this as an example, right? This is a simple example to illustrate my point. Now you have these issues. This is an issue. It's an issue. I love pasta. I love drinking espresso. And I love pizza. And you think, well, gee, I'm American. Everybody loves pizza and pasta. No. My parents are Ukrainian. And they love They eat potatoes. So you look into it, you don't know. And when you get older, you start to think about it, and your parents come up to you and say, hey, we didn't want to tell you, but you were adopted. Right? If you can't figure it out, your parents will tell you. If you do enough of your own thinking and research, you realize I'm adopted. You do a genetic test. I've got Italian DNA. Right? You find out, I got a genetic test, I'm 75% Italian. And my parents are both Ukrainian. So I'm trying to illustrate the point. That was a secret. Your parents didn't want to tell you for whatever reason. Now you find out, or they tell you, yeah, you were adopted. Your parents were Italian. They died, or they were too poor. Now what happens? That's why I like pasta. I'm a fucking Italian. So that's the second component. Heritage. So you have karma. Karma gets passed on. Same thing. Why am I stealing? Why am I committing crime? Because my dad was a criminal. My dad was in jail once. He didn't tell me. Or I knew about it, but I didn't think it was important. My dad's in jail, I'm in jail. Karma. My dad was in the mafia, and then he had me doing stuff, and they were all crimes. And I ended up in the mafia. Karma. Right? You don't think of it at the time you're doing something. In the current moment, you're not thinking what it will lead into. But after 20 years, if you've been doing drugs for 20 years, and you got terrible relationships, and your career is off the path, and your health is terrible, and you're sitting in the hospital, guess what? You got to deal with it. So you go back to what caused that. Why? When did I start taking drugs? What happened? Why was I doing it? What caused it? What was my relationship to my parents? Did somebody do something to me? And that is your healing process, right? How did I go from here to the hospital? If you don't want to deal with that, and many people don't, then it's just going to continue, and you're going to exit. Understand the why. And sometimes the why is so deep, is so hidden, right? And that's why people do ayahuasca, because they can't get out of their body to find out, see the whole picture. How did it all happen? This happened when I was young. This happened this is what my parents did. This is where I went wrong. Like when you do these kind of treatments, you see the whole picture. So you've got this karma, you've got this heritage. Is it in your DNA? Is it part of your heritage? Do you have a certain genetic disposition for health problems, right? Like heart disease runs in my family. Mental illness runs in my family. By the same token, like we're talking about illness, we're talking about bad things, but it can be good. Like let's say you have ESP. Let's say you have ESP and you can read energy and you can see the future. And you're like, what's going on? You ask your parents, Dad, Mom, I think I got ESP. And then your parents say, oh yeah, your grandmother had it. Your grandmother was a fortune teller. What? My grandmother was a fortune teller and you never told me? And then you're like, And your uncle used to be a psychic. Although he died. You always got to throw that in. He was a bad guy. He cheated on his wife. They always have to do that. He was a really good psychic, but he cheated on his wife. I didn't like that. And then they don't tell you that. So then you realize there's this heritage, right? You see the heritage? So, because we're talking about bad things, but there's also good. You have this disposition. You have psychic ability. You can see aliens, right? So how come I can see aliens? How come I get visited by spaceships? So you think, well, at first it's kind of scary, it's kind of weird, and then you're trying to realize, gee, maybe I have a heritage that's connected to off-planet people. Maybe I have some kind of a genetic connection, a heritage, a star heritage. Maybe I'm one of these hybrid children. And the reason, the logic is not to scare or confuse. It's to understand. It's to understand. If you want to understand who you are, you have to go back to your parents. And you guys have to go back to your past. If you do the work, if you really want to get into it, once you do that, once you do the basics, then you get into like past lives. You don't go to that first. You got to do the basic steps. Right? Deal with your issues. And this takes a lot of time. Like if I have an addiction, what's causing the addiction? What's the event? Did something happen that started it? And why is that important? Is if you can find out the why. Let's say you have a very serious addiction, and you've gone through therapy after therapy. You know all the therapies. You can do your own therapy. And you're still struggling with it. You still have relapse, remission. So it's something, it could be something imprinted on your soul. And this is the work I end up usually doing. So that if you go back to when an event or an incident or a circumstance took place that imprinted on your soul this new identity, the need to rebel. And the rebellion is to take drugs as a form of rebellion. Like when you understand the why, my belief is when you understand the why, right? And the why can take years. I just want to be very clear. It can take decades to figure out. But when you understand the why, your condition, your illness, your condition, your issue could disappear. Just like that. If you understand the exact reason why. Now, normally you find a reason and your situation gets better. And then you stop. But actually, if you go one more step, there's another reason, there's another why, and then it gets even better. And there's several whys before you get to the big why. And it's a tiny event, when your father kicked you in the face. And that could be, but you can't start at that original why. You have to work your way back. And some people say, I just want to get to that. No, you have to work your way back to peel the onion to figure out the why. If you understand, I believe, and I've seen it in my own life, that I can go right back to the issue and then I have to deal with it, understand it, and then whatever issue just goes away. Like there's no more impetus because I got rid of the why. Now the hard part is if other people are involved. I'm gonna take my glasses off here. Hey, that's better. The hard part is if other people are involved. So let's say your parents involved. So let's just say, or your spouse, your ex. So to help yourself, you have to confront somebody. Now they can be a dangerous person. They can be a sick parent. They might have Alzheimer's. They might be a spouse who's cut off from you. So that becomes the challenge, is to help to cure yourself of an illness or an addiction, or to understand your heritage. You have to confront somebody who may not want to confront you, may not want to talk to you. By the same token, they may be too sick. They may be too in denial. They may be in denial to even acknowledge that there ever was a problem. Or I never did anything to you, because if they admit it, then they could go to jail. Or they would have to, if you admit something, then you have to now deal with, now you have a problem. Then, right? So people don't want to deal with this thing. And I'm seeing this stuff. I see this stuff in my life. This is not just random talk. This is from experience. That you confront people and they just deny it, or they don't want to deal with it. And the years start to go by, and then when it does come out, everybody gets upset. So sometimes that's the hard part is, it's not only you facing yourself, but you have to now, so if you had a parent, let's say they were in jail, and they're very ashamed by it, what they did. And you ask them, what did you do this? And they don't want to tell you. They're ashamed, and they might feel you're going to lose respect for them. Right? They don't want to admit they're an alcoholic, and they come from a culture, their old culture. They can't admit that. So now that's a challenge. That's the hard part, because now you're healing, your therapy is getting the answer, and the person who has the answer is just not cooperating. That's sometimes the hard part, right? And so you can work around that by going into the spirit. You go into the spirit, meditation, soul retrieval. You figure it out. Like there's ways around it. It's wet. But, so whatever you don't accomplish or deal with in this life, it carries on to your next life. It carries on into your children. If you are the child, and you're having problems, and we all have problems, and they're quite serious, you have to go now. You can go to your parents, right? And there's always a family secret. There's always a family secret. And sometimes there's a lot of information there's a lot of healing in that. Something happened in the family, something we can't talk about, right? Right? Let's say your dad was in a witness protection program. Now you can't talk about that because that could lead to problems. So if you're dealing with issues, or if your children are dealing with issues, there's a relationship between you and them and you. And the healing can be accomplished by understanding, whether it's karmic, whether it's heritage, whether it's spirit. It's imprinted on your spirit. And if you can deal with those issues, your life will get better. You will ease the burdens. If your child is sick, if you help your child, you help yourself.